Gregg is a co-founder of the Center, A Place for Hope. 31 years, you just said, right? That's exciting, very exciting. And Gregg is the author. Are we up to 30 books now, or you hit 30? So it's been one a year for every year for the last how many years?
Yep.
Yes? Just yes, okay. He has written a bunch of books on a lot of really, really important topics. He's going to give some away for free again today.
Really?
Yeah. I said, you did in Bellevue. What happened?
That was Bellevue.
You got something against Edmonds? Yeah. Gregg has really walked with a lot of people in terms of depression, healing. The center has been a wonderful place to have in Edmonds for a number of years. So, Gregg, I'll let you expand on that if you would like to, and let's welcome Gregg.
I first migrated to Edmonds the day that Mount St. Helens went off. May 7th, right? 18th. Well, see, I don't even remember when it was. And I was driving here from Idaho. I'm from Idaho. I was on I-5, the Renton S-curves. All the cars were pulling off the corner, or the road, the freeway, and I didn't have a clue why. And then, by radio and seeing the black cloud, welcome to Seattle. I had everything I owned in my little car. I was come to go to school, Seattle Pacific University, stayed here, met my wife, and really had a vision for what we wanted to do with whole person care and through the years how that's organic and evolves. And so we're unique in that we are a licensed facility for mental health, medical, and chemical dependency, and we have 44 beds. Did you know we have 44 beds here in Edmonds? And 70% of our patients come from outside of the state of Washington. 70%. And our clients come into the town of Edmonds for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever they may need. And they tend to spend money in our community. In a recent survey, an average client spent about $1,500 over 4 weeks. We are here to help improve the economy. That's just a little side note. And I still feel passionate about what we do. And there's 40 on staff, and that's everything from psychiatry to naturopath. I love naturopaths and natural medicine, to the dietitians, to fitness. And we actually work a lot with business folks who are tired, weary, burned out, and a lot of times they're over the edge, and they're making mistakes they wouldn't normally make. But, after a while, what happens is we reach that end point. The World Health Organization says that depression will be the number one problem in the world by year 2020. Depression. Isn't that amazing to think about? And that's above heart disease, that's above cancer, depression. They call it a disease. So the number one thing that we see is presenting issue is depression. A couple years ago, an independent news organization did some surveys, talking to patients, doing and how you do things, and we were put in the top 10 list of places in the country that are privately held to get help for depression. And because I believe in the whole person. Now, we're always working on improving it, but that's really what it's about. So, can I share a few gifts before I jump into our topic? Since John has told me there's free books, we'll get his credit card before I leave. Just kidding, they're free. This will be fast. It's just a fast gift. And on the way out, I'm going to give everybody a copy of my most recent book just as a gift on the way out, because you have a neighbor that needs it. Remember, these books are never for ourselves. We all know somebody. And don't, say, if you came with a spouse, don't say, hey, you really need this. The way you do that is you just put it on his nightstand. But we all know that women still read 80% of the books, so you may have to. And these don't have pictures, and so guys need pictures. I had a gal in my office a few years ago who said, Dr. Jantz, I'm doing really well, the eating disorder and all the other things, I really feel good about where I am. But she said the question, but what now? What do I do now? And the thing that came to my mind was, I said, well, it's okay to be happy. So long people have lived with a label or some identity, and to think about being happy. And what was interesting, so I decided to write a book, Happy for the Rest of Your Life. Oh, did you know 2% of the people actually lose weight and keep it off for a year or longer? 2%. 2%.
Wow.
And don't we want to know what they do differently?
Yeah.
Here's a good one. How to love the body you got. Well, you get the body you want. The body God designed. It's just, sometimes we get off on the wrong path, and it takes us a while to get back on. And so I'm going to just run a few books for sake of time to tables, and you guys can pass and share what you'd like to do. And because some of these are, I always get the fun topics like depression and anxiety. And here's one on how to avoid sexualized improper relationships. So, but I do have a few, like healthy habits, happy kids. So I have 2 boys, 16 and 13. I have one boy that is a wonderful eater. I have another boy that I've done everything, including carving faces into apples so they'll be happier to eat. Oh, to boys. Raising boys by design. Do you have boys? I love it. Okay, I partnered with Michael Garian, who's like the brain specialist as it relates to boys. His work in the Garian Institute is really changing many schools on how they're reaching boys. Do you know today, private or public school, boys still receive 90% of the D's and F's. The boys still have the majority of discipline problems, and our boys are not doing well in school. And we have that alone tells us we have a problem. And so what do? So this is all about how to reach boys. And I was just having a discussion with my oldest son who's taking a psychology class. And I said, that's the one class you got to get an A in, please. That would really help me if you got an A in that class. And I said, but remember, you have a prefrontal cortex. This is your executive function. You are a male. It's not fully operational till about age 25, but if you speed it up, it'll make me look better. Don't Call It Love. I just wrote with Tim Clinton, who's the president of the American Christian Counseling Association, and this is all on relationship dependency. We all have somebody in our life that we will do anything for, even when we know it's not the best thing to do, and it's the person that maybe they're struggling with an addiction, but we'll do anything for them. And sometimes it's really not that helpful, and it hurts us both. So this is all about how to have healthy relationships. It's Valentine's Day, so I would suggest not giving this book. Don't Call It Love. Valentine's, give love. So, hey, who are the people in our lives? This whole topic of self-responsibility. My first job out of school was at Purdy Treatment Center for Women. Do you know what that is? Have you heard of Purdy? Now, why is it women's prisons, we call them treatment centers, men, we call them prisons. But I lived in Edmonds, and what I did was I drove to Purdy, crossed that big bridge every morning, and I went to a place that looked like a community college campus, except it had the barbed wire around the outside, and in the middle was the special needs section. Now, do you know what a special needs section of a women's prison is? That's my assignment. I was assigned right out of school to the special needs section of a women's prison. How about that for your first job? Because there in the prison, there were women who hadn't seen a guy for a while, or they were really, really mad and angry at men because they're in prison because they were with the wrong guy and got in trouble. Either way, not seeing a guy for a while or mad at him, it was not a good place for me. I didn't last that long there. But I did learn that there was a lot of eating disorders in the prison. Lots of eating disorders. And we began to develop kind of a philosophy of whole person care around eating disorders. For many, many years, that was the big thing that we treated. And I actually ended up I fell into the helper's disease, which is the disease of saying yes to everything. And so I'm embarrassed to tell you this is 1989. I have reformed. But I would say yes to, yes, we were having good success. And I would see clients 6 days a week and sometimes more. And I went through a major personal depression and crisis because, if you're not taking care of yourself, I had good intentions, but I wasn't taking good care of myself. So I had to totally realign my life. I even reached a point where I thought I had really missed my calling, and I was looking at what else was I supposed to do. And really thankfully to my wife and family who threw me a life preserver. I think it took me a year just to get healthy again physically and just begin to restore. So I want to share some things that I learned. Trust some of it will be helpful, because really the big question is, and when the school called me about my 7th grader and said, we have this issue, I said to the principal, I said, well, what would be helpful? You ever have a kid? You ever get a call from the principal? Have you had that? You go, why am I getting this call? And prayerfully praying for what would be helpful. What's the helpful thing to do? How do we, and this is part of our philosophy, what can we do that may be different but can be really helpful? And so I want to talk about what I've noticed in folks that have good, strong, what I'll call self-responsibility. How are they different? Now, we work a fair amount, at least once a month, with professional athletes, folks who come in from Southern California who don't want to let anybody know they're here, and they get an alias name, and there's no paparazzi in Edmonds, and their life is messed up and out of control. And one of the things that we do is we want to look at how do we not just treat symptoms, but how do we really change lives for good for the long run. Do you know somebody who has a lot of emotional intelligence? That's kind of almost a buzzword, but emotional intelligence and how they're different. Well, I want to talk about what's not present. Are you ready for this? You know a person's in trouble if they have these things. Number 1, low impulse control. Now this is not really a psychology lecture, but low impulse control. Don't we live in a one-click world right now? And that anything we need, we can just take our device, and we don't call them cell phones, but these are devices. And I can go right on, and in a couple clicks, I can get anything I want. And I'm used to getting everything instantly. In fact, I do a lot with technology and mental health. The number 1 search engine for the kids between ages 12 and 17, they don't Google. The number 1 search engine is what? YouTube. They want to know how to do something, they're using YouTube. And this happened last night at my dinner table. I asked the question, when you want to know something, what do you do? Well, YouTube it, Dad. So we're in Ecuador. I have my oldest son with me, and he wants to help. We're helping a counseling center there. He wants to help paint the walls. I need to go off and do what I need to do. I come back, and he's painted. And it looks beautiful. And I said, how did you know how to do this? He said, Dad, I YouTubed it. But we're used to having information instantly, aren't we? And people who have low impulse control typically are not these people that have good self-responsibility. And low impulse control leads to a whole series of problems. Why is it that sexual addiction is the fastest growing addiction for our kids? Take that age group 12 to 17. And the average exposure to pornography on the internet is age 10 for boys, age 11 for girls. Okay, so we see boys now exposure to pornography instantly because parents don't know what's happening on their devices and they have instant accessibility. And how many parents don't even know or clueless about what's going on, and how many kids sleep with their devices under their pillows or in their rooms. 60% of our kids right now have a gaming device in their rooms that has a connection to the internet. Interesting, isn't it? So as you look at the sexual addiction, fastest growing addiction among our youth. The exchange of pictures, sex, and this whole, because we live in, there's no impulse control. There's no parameters. And they don't learn to take self-responsibility. How about that? You see that? Isn't that, just to pause and think about that for a minute, exposure to pornography at age 10, by age 16, they have all the symptoms and characteristics of a sexual addiction. fastest growing addiction among our youth. And parents are generally clueless. The most active time for social media right now, what's the hours? If you're age 12 to 17, what's your most active hours on social media? 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. That's the most activity on social media for that age group. How about that? How you guys doing? Oh, I said we'd have fun, didn't we? We better steer this in a whole different way. It was starting to go down. Oh, as we look at self-responsibility, but just look at that impulse control. Maybe it's time to even look at ourselves. It was so funny. We do something with, and technology is a good area to start with. We do something in our home called technology detox. And what we do is we don't do it every week, but we have a thing where one evening a week our kids can talk about anything. It's digital dinner. Digital dinner, they can talk about anything technology, and we can ask them any questions, and that's where we learn what's going on. Because I knew in my home, when my two boys were texting each other at the dinner table, I had a problem. They're not talking, they're texting. So, and we know that people have different personalities when they get behind their devices. They'll do and say things on a device they'll never do in person. So, if we look at technology detox, now when people come to us, anything with the screen gets checked in and put in a safe, and you don't have it for the duration that you're with us. Now, there are a few exceptions. Guess what? I'd say over half of our patients or our clients, day 2, are cranky, irritable, sweaty palms, heart rate's gone up, blood pressure's up. And what is it? I've got to have my device. You don't understand. What are they having? They're having withdrawal symptoms. Yeah. So to look at technology detox, so we take a day, week, usually it's Sunday, where we try to stay free and we work on talking to each other in real life. So, which brings there's 7 points for us here today, so hang on. Which brings us really to the next point. If we're going to live with a high degree of self-responsibility, and by the way, it's not real popular these days, passing the buck and blaming, and I'll tell you right now, we know when a person starts to get well in our setting, when they stop blaming. And something else begins to creep in. It's called gratitude. It's called gratitude. When you start to see gratitude go up and blaming go down, something is happening. So it's like the person who comes to us and maybe it's alcohol, and so we're doing a random UA, we're testing them randomly to just make sure. At first, are they upset about that? Why did you pick me? Well, your number came up today. At first they're angry. A few weeks usually along, then they go, okay, no problem. Because they're welcoming the accountability. If we have strong self-responsibility, we're going to welcome accountability. It's okay. It doesn't bother us. And you'll notice that. And really, self-responsibility is going to equate eventually into strong self-esteem. So this whole area of being addiction-free is really... so remember, sexual addiction, fast-growing. What's the other fastest-growing addictions, just for us to be aware of?
Internet?
Well, Internet's is huge, and we're just on the tip of the iceberg of what's happening in the Internet. Drugs are always there. Alcohol is kind of always there. But if we look at what is actually evolved to be a critical addiction in the state of Washington.
Marijuana.
Marijuana is going to be. We are the grand experiment as it relates to pot. The other addiction is gambling. Gambling addiction. So it's almost as though it's normal. Because if you turn on the TV tonight, you're going to see all the tribal casinos advertising, except it's almost as though it's normal. We go for entertainment to the casino. We've normalized it. So isn't that interesting? So we're just looking at what's happening addiction-wise, because if I have strong self-responsibility, I probably am pretty addiction-free. I don't have, because addiction is a way for me to mood alter, change how I feel, and ultimately that addiction takes on the power and control, and it makes the most important thing in my life. And we all know somebody who's been affected by addiction, if it's not been us, right? I mentioned eating disorder. So seeing eating disorder clients who binge and purge, and food is their addiction. And in 1989, after doing this for so long, I could really connect with it. I could go, I can hardly wait to go home and have my half gallon of ice cream too. Because that's what you become, what you hang out with. You do. And so I needed to adjust some things in my life. All right, you guys doing okay?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking. What does self-responsibility? I just gave you a few things about what it's not. What does self-responsibility look like? One is you make sure that you're on time by looking at your device. Good. What's it look like? Well, you'll notice that a person who really's got a lot of good, they take self-responsibility, we want to be with them. They're like, you're not sensing blame, they're not stuck in the past, and they tend to seem like really grateful people. My wife, who went through breast cancer and covered about 2 years outside of it, started sometime during the process what she calls a gratitude journal. And every day, and she's got incredible discipline, but every day she's writing some things in this gratitude journal. And I asked her just last night, what are you up to? And she says, I'm up to 9,653. How can you even think of that? But gratitude has a powerful effect in our lives. And this is one of the traits of those with high self-response. They're grateful people. We usually like to be around them. Now, a person that's full of unforgiveness and resentments, what are they like? Well, what's the visual picture? They're bent over and they're cranky, right? There's a visual picture that comes. You say this person's full of resentment. You have a visual picture of that, and we know that resentment and unforgiveness. It's hard to be taken self-responsible. Usually, you're into blame. You haven't forgiven the past. Another hallmark for us in working with people is when they cross that threshold and that gratitude's entered in, they become a more forgiving person. I'm no longer forgiving my parents, or I'm no longer blaming my parents. I am now practicing forgiveness. I'm not, I'm no longer blaming God, I'm practicing, and something happens. And I think their posture changes, and you begin to see something happen when this forgiveness begins to take root in their life. And it's powerful. And we can always tell that forgiveness and gratitude are the two things that we see really begin to transform for people. It's transformational. People with high self-responsibility tend to be really forgiving people. How do you do that? I think it's an ongoing practice to really practice being a forgiving person. I had a gal who, she shares her story, so I'll share it with you, but she was struggling with some cancer issues. And I said, we always ask the question, what do you think that's about? What's it about for you? And it was an eye-opener because for her, she said, well, I know what it's about. I go, what do you think it's about? She says, I think it's all the unforgiveness I've carried so long. I don't want to be that way anymore. So, well, let's figure that piece out. Let's figure out what it means to be a forgiving person and see what effect it may have. Sometimes we know this, and other times people just blindly walk through and they've become embittered. And it's hard for us to have healthy relationships with embittered people. It's hard to be intimate, hard to be close with people that are embittered. So, all right.
It's not me this time.
Bill, you want me to talk to him? For a short period of time when I was going to school, I worked at the University of Washington in the Department of Nursing. I worked in a sleep laboratory. And at that time, the sleep laboratory, I hope it's different now, But at that time, the sleep laboratory was actually in a health building that had on one side of it the cadavers for the medical students. Big room, is bigger than this. It was a big room full of cadavers. And that was next to me. I'm in the sleep lab. I'm the little peon research assistant that helps people who are coming for this sleep laboratory, and I'm putting on electrodes with airplane glue and getting them off with acetone. It was really primitive then. And chunks of hair would come out of their head. And you go, aren't you glad you were a part of this research study? Ignore your hair, you'll be fine. And then next to that was the primate lab, on the other side of me, the monkeys. So sleep lab in the middle, cadavers on one side, and the primate, the monkey experimentation lab on the other side. You think, who designed this? How did they ever figure it out to do this? So my job really was to put electrodes on people's heads, and I was a student. I figured, good job, I can stay up at night and study, right? And it's simple. I just have to have at that time it's all paper, have to have the paper stack of all their sleep during the night, all stacked up for the researcher to come in the morning and see and clean the person's head and so forth. Easy job. But you guys know what happens when you don't get enough sleep. And that's what happened to me, sleep deprivation. And I remember being so desperate for sleep that in my delirium, I went next door to the room full of cadavers. I was looking for an empty cot. I just needed 15 minutes of sleep, right? Now, when you open the door to the cadaver room, it smells like formaldehyde. And you see sheets over these cadavers, but I'm looking for an empty cot. I knew not to call in with somebody. I found an empty gurney, a cot, and I laid down. And, you tell yourself when you're desperate, okay, I just need 15 minutes, I'll get right up. Apparently it was longer than 15 minutes. I was fast asleep. And the janitor came in. And sometime during the night, the janitor came in. And he flipped on the light, right? I jump up. And I remember him screaming because he'd never seen a cadaver get up. He's screaming, and of course what I do, I go, oh no, because I don't know what happened, what time it was. I get up and I'm running around the corner to the next room, and I have to tell, never saw the guy since. Don't even know what happened. But if we're taking self-responsibility, that means self-care. That means sleep. And I was not good at it. Wasn't as a student, I was not doing good self-care. But we take self-care and we take our sleep. You know what we found? That we now have sleep studies that we do on probably 90% of our patients now. We do a sleep study because the majority of them are coming in with major sleep issues. And if it's not sleep apnea, their sleep cycles are all disturbed. If they have addiction issues, they're not getting the right amounts of sleep stages and REM sleep and so forth. We've got to look at sleep and how sleep affects. Don't you think the lack of it affects our personalities? Yeah. Oh my goodness, does it ever. So look at self-care in my life. How am I doing with the basics? Are there sleep issues? We find when we begin to help people with the sleep issues, a lot of other things begin to change. So my self-care, it's a part of self-responsibility. Finally, after 2 more points. People who have high self-responsibility tend to be really generous people. There's a spirit of generosity about them. And you notice it about them. And it's not just generous with money, though that may be, but there's a generosity about them that's intriguing, that makes you want to be around them. And the question we asked about balance, is an interesting question. Many of us didn't grow up in homes where there was much balance. We didn't even really know what it was, and we're trying to find our way, and we're 56 years old, or I'm 57. What's balance? And how do we do that? And how do we do that for the long run? So we look at the whole area of generosity. And I find that part of our generosity comes by our lips, the things we say to people, and the blessing we give. And I have to tell you, I struggled growing up in school. Junior high, I might as well not have been there. Come to think of it, I was expelled a few times. But I struggled in school. I struggled in my first 2 years of high school, and then somebody kind of got an interest in me, and it was a male, and he began to spend time with me. And I did not do sports in high school, though I wish I would have. But he kept talking to me about things he believed I could do. And every time I was with this guy, he was seeking me out. And I know later now my parents helped set this up. But he showed interest in me. And I remember he told me, he encouraged me. He said, you can run. And I remember I was sent away to a camp, for a camp during the summer. And this guy shows up there. He's the speaker at this camp. Wow, this guy just won't leave me alone. And he used to say things to me. He would say, I believe in you. I believe in you. His generosity with his words. I didn't realize the seeds he was planting. Now, at the end of this camp was a cross-country run where you lined up and you ran. Now, I'd never been a runner. This is high school. And he said, Gregg, I believe in you. And so I think because he said that, shortly before the lineup, I wouldn't get in the line. And that, going into my senior year in high school, I just took off running. And I ran, because all I could hear was this guy saying, I believe in you, I believe in you. And I did not know if there was somebody in front of me or behind me. I just ran. I was a little Forrest Gump running. And because I heard those voices, I believe in you. I crossed the finish line first. I had never been in a run before. That was a turning point. I believe in you. Generosity with words and imparting that belief changed the whole trajectory of I was voted outstanding student of the year in my senior high school. I had been a failure up to that point. One person's believing in me changed the course of my life, which hence affects me today. We have something in our home where we're careful with it, but where we impart with our boys, I believe in you. I want them to have that message because it changed my life. And those 3 words, I believe in you. It was when we had a good snowstorm here a couple years ago. I was pulling out of the driveway, and my youngest boy came running out of the house. I was leaving early. He was in his pajamas. There was snow in the driveway, and he's running outside. It's cold, and he hits on my window. And what in the world are you doing, Benji? And rolled down the window, and it's freezing cold, snow, with no shoes on or anything. And he goes, Dad, I just want you to know I believe in you. Did I have a good day that day?
Yeah.
I go, where did that come from? Because the same boy as a 7th grader, I'm believing in him. But we can impart that in others, the generosity with our words. The other piece that's so important is we have to let go of these 3 emotions. A person with high self-responsibility who's, I would suggest, successful, you will not see these present. The 3 deadly emotions: anger, fear, and guilt. What's anger? Another word for anger could be hurt. I've been really hurt, so it comes out by anger. Anger, resentments, bitterness, whatever form it may take. This whole area of anger. And we already know that anger, having a lot of anger and resentments, what it does to our health, besides our relationships. Now, there's appropriate anger times, but a person who walks around as an angry person develops something that the Gottmans, formerly at the University of Washington, described something called a perpetual negative perspective. I like that. A perpetual negative perspective. Do you live with somebody who has that? You can say something positive, and whatever it is, their response back is generally a negative. They are the not only is the glass half full, but the glass is broke. They are perpetually negative. And they carry this as a trait about their personality now. In fact, that was one of the predictors of a relationship that is going to fail, that's in trouble, is if a person has developed a perpetual negative perspective. They do not have the ability to see the positive or to see gratitude. Isn't that interesting? And you guys may know that some of their research, we can wire you up and ask you a few questions, and in 3 minutes' time, he's going to say, well, your relationship's going to succeed or fail based upon your physiological responses. I'm going to ask you some questions and wire you up. No. Faith and intervention of God is not really measured, but interesting that we can predict that what's going to go well or not go well. So, and as we look at the whole area of anger, we just want to do a checkup from the neck up. Anger. Where is it in my life? Fear. Anxiety. The second most common thing that we see. People who have generalized anxiety. We live in a culture of great anxiety. There's school shootings and kids are afraid to go to school. What do I tell my kids? The anxiety permeates. How do we handle anxiety in our lives? The final one I want to mention is guilt. True guilt and false guilt. What's true guilt? I screwed up and I need to ask for forgiveness, right? False guilt, some people grew up in a false guilt. You just grew up to feel guilty. And you take it on whether it was you or not. And so look for anger, fear, and guilt. In the highly self-responsible person, you'll see they manage that, or they're addressing those, what I call the 3 deadly emotions, as ultimate it can be. All right, I need to finish. How you guys doing? It's kind of like at church where we all want to finish at the same time. Well, I mean, you ever been to church and the pastor's not done, but you are? Today we're just trying to time it. We're all done at the same time. On your way out, would you grab a book? It's a gift. Thank you.